For decades, the British royal system has operated on a simple belief. Once you leave, you lose relevance. Step outside the gates and you're supposed to fade quietly into the background, like a former employee whose email access has been revoked and whose name is slowly erased from the office group chat. That belief worked beautifully right up until it didn't. Because Prince Harry didn't vanish. He didn't unravel, he didn't spiral into obscurity or return begging for ceremonial relevance. Instead, he did the one thing the monarchy never prepared for. He thrived outside the system. And nothing unsettles an ancient institution more than discovering it is not in fact the main character anymore. The modern monarchy loves control. Control of optics, control of hierarchy, control of who stands where, who speaks when, and who gets praised for doing absolutely nothing beyond existing in the right bloodline. What it does not love is autonomy. Prince Harry, stepping back from royal life, wasn't just a personal decision, it was a structural challenge. Not because it broke the rules, but because it exposed how fragile those rules really are. The palace insists it's about duty, tradition, and service. But when someone chooses a different model of service, one that doesn't require bowing to inherited authority, the system reacts like a corporation discovering an employee can work remotely and outperform everyone still stuck in the office. Suddenly, the rules get rewritten. The tone changes, the briefings multiply, and the word tradition is wheeled out like a shield. This is where the story gets truly awkward for the British establishment, because the lesson they refuse to learn is being demonstrated elsewhere in Europe. When Prince Joachim moved to the United States in 2023 after his children's titles were removed, it didn't trigger a constitutional meltdown. There were no weeks of hysterical commentary about betrayal. No endless editorials about loyalty, no public shaming disguised as concern. It was treated, brace yourself, as a life decision. And now, with plans announced to return to Denmark in 2027, it's clear this wasn't exile. It was flexibility. That single word flexibility is what terrifies the British royal system. Because flexibility implies choice. And choice undermines hierarchy. Every time Prince Harry appears in the UK, whether for legal proceedings, public events, or professional commitments, the same cycle repeats. Speculation explodes. Commentators rush to interpret meaning. Headlines scream return, reconciliation, or olive branch. Why? Because the palace desperately wants the narrative to bend back toward itself. If Harry shows up, it must be about them. If Harry speaks, it must be about them. If Harry succeeds, it must somehow be framed as incomplete without them. But here's the inconvenient truth. Harry's life no longer revolves around royal validation, and that independence is precisely why the system can't let him go. Harry's legal fight over government-backed security in the UK is often framed as stubbornness or entitlement by critics who miss the bigger picture. This case isn't about nostalgia, it's about precedent. Because if a senior royal figure can step back, live independently, and still challenge the system when it fails, then the monarchy's authority is no longer absolute. It becomes negotiable. And institutions built on inherited power do not like negotiation. Then there's the Invictus Games, a project that should have been the monarchy's crowning modern achievement, but instead exists entirely outside its control. Invictus is respected. It's meaningful. It delivers real impact without pageantry or deference. And most importantly, it proves that Prince Harry's leadership resonates globally without royal endorsement. As London prepares for events this summer and Birmingham gears up for the 2027 Games, the royal press suddenly remembers how important Harry is, despite spending years insisting he wasn't. Funny how relevance works when you can't control it. The familiar chorus of royal commentators, including Richard Fitzwilliams, declaring it would be unthinkable for certain figures not to attend. Unthinkable is a fascinating word choice. It suggests inevitability, obligation, pressure, in other words, control. The monarchy doesn't ask, it expects. And when expectation fails, it reframes the absence as a statement, a snub, or a crisis. But Harry's absence or presence is no longer symbolic of loyalty. It's symbolic of autonomy. Reports that King Charles III has tasked Catherine, Princess of Wales, with smoothing tensions reveal the palace's default response to modern challenges. Optics. Assign a role. Stage a gesture. Hope the public reads it as unity. But gestures don't fix structural problems. And symbolism doesn't replace reform. The monarchy isn't struggling because of interpersonal tension, it's struggling because it refuses to adapt to a world where authority must be earned, not inherited. Here's the irony at the heart of this entire saga. The palace insists it's above drama, yet it cannot stop reacting to one man who left half a decade ago. Every article, every leak, every source close to the palace betrays the same anxiety. What if people realize life exists beyond the crown? Harry represents that possibility, calmly, consistently, without shouting, and that scares the institution more than open rebellion ever could. If this weren't so serious, it would be hilarious. An institution centuries old, dripping in gold and ceremony, nervously monitoring the movements of someone it insists is irrelevant. A system that claims permanence, yet constantly adjusts its messaging depending on what Harry does next. That's not confidence, that's brand management in crisis mode. European royals have shown that stepping away doesn't mean stepping down. That mobility doesn't equal betrayal. That modern relevance requires flexibility. The British monarchy, however, remains stuck in the belief that authority must be enforced rather than evolved. Prince Harry didn't reject service. He rejected control. And until the institution understands that distinction, it will keep repeating the same mistakes while the world moves on without waiting. So, as speculation swirls this summer, remember this. Prince Harry doesn't need a return narrative. He doesn't need permission. He doesn't need validation from a system that can't imagine life beyond itself. The monarchy, on the other hand, is still trying to prove it matters in a world that increasingly asks why. And that contrast? That's the real story.